Before hundreds of wealthy patrons and millions watching the live stream, a famous singer did something no one expected. Ardan Solis pointed at a black man in a janitor's uniform standing near the stage exit and called him up, not to honor him, to humiliate him. "Sing," she said, handing him the microphone under blinding lights. No backing track, no preparation, no escape. The mic stayed live as she leaned close and whispered, "Fail quietly." But nobody in that room knew who he really was, or what he could do with his voice when the world tried to break him. 6 hours before Ardan Solis handed him that microphone, Tariq Ellison was wiping down the marble floors of the Ryman Auditorium with a mop that smelled like disinfectant and old water. The gala wasn't supposed to start until 7 that evening, but the production crew had been setting up since dawn. He kept his head down and his movements efficient. That was the trick to being invisible. Do the work well enough that no one notices you're there. He had been working at the Ryman for 3 years. It was steady pay, and steady was all he could afford to care about anymore. The job came with health insurance, which meant his daughter could see her cardiologist every month without him having to choose between her medication and rent. That was worth more than pride, worth more than the dreams he used to carry before life taught him what happened when you reached too high. Tariq's daughter was named Grace. She was 8 years old and had been born with a congenital heart defect that required monitoring, medication, and eventually surgery that would cost more than he made in 5 years. She didn't know her father had once stood on a stage in front of thousands of people. She didn't know he had once been told he had a voice that could change the industry. All she knew was that her dad worked nights, came home tired, and still made her breakfast every morning before school. The memory of that other life lived in a part of Tariq's mind he rarely opened. He had been 24 when he auditioned for Apex Stage, one of the biggest televised singing competitions in the country. The judges told him his vocal range was unusual. 4 octaves, clean and controlled, with a falsetto that didn't crack, and a chest voice that could fill an arena without a microphone. He made it through 6 rounds, then 7. By the time the semi-finals arrived, people were calling him the favorite to win. But 2 days before the final round, his wife collapsed at home. The doctors said it was an aneurysm. She was 26 weeks pregnant with Grace. They had to deliver early to save the baby, and even then, the odds weren't good. Tariq missed the semi-final performance because he was in a hospital waiting room, holding his wife's hand while machines beeped around them. She died 3 hours after Grace was born. The producers of Apex Stage didn't care. When he didn't show up, they disqualified him. The rules were clear. No second chances, no exceptions. But the real damage came later, during the live broadcast of the finals. Ardan Solis, who had been one of the guest judges that season, was asked about his absence. She looked directly into the camera and said he clearly didn't want it badly enough. She said talent without discipline was worthless. She said he had disrespected everyone who believed in him. The clip went viral. Tariq became a cautionary tale, the guy who threw it all away, the guy who didn't have what it took. Nobody asked why he left. Nobody cared. The industry moved on, and Ardan Solis became even more famous. She released an album 6 months later that went triple platinum. Her voice was called Once in a Generation. Flawless. Untouchable. Tariq stopped singing after that. Not because he couldn't, but because every time he opened his mouth, he heard her voice in his head telling the world he wasn't enough. He took whatever work he could find. Dishwasher, security guard, warehouse loader. Then the Ryman hired him, and he convinced himself it was fine. He could raise Grace. He could keep her safe. That was enough. But tonight was different. Tonight, Ardan Solis was hosting a charity gala at the Ryman to raise money for a children's hospital. The irony wasn't lost on him. She would stand on that stage and talk about helping sick kids, while his own daughter sat at home with a babysitter, waiting for the surgery they couldn't afford. The tickets to the gala cost $5,000 each. Tariq made $32,000 a year. He finished mopping the lobby and moved backstage. The sound crew was running tests, and he could hear Ardan's voice coming through the speakers. She was rehearsing her opening number. The sound was perfect. Too perfect. Tariq had been around enough live performances to know when a voice was being sweetened by the board. He didn't think much of it at first. Plenty of singers used backing tracks for big events. It was normal. But then he heard her warm up in the green room while he was emptying the trash. The door was cracked, and her vocal coach was with her. She was running scales, and something was off. Her upper register sounded thin, strained. The notes that were supposed to soar just hovered, uncertain and slightly flat. Her coach stopped her and suggested they lower the key. Ardan snapped at him. She said the audience expected her signature high notes. She said she didn't pay him to make excuses. Tariq kept walking. It wasn't his business. He had learned a long time ago that survival meant staying out of things that didn't concern him. But the thought stayed with him as he worked through the rest of his shift. He had watched Ardan build an empire on the idea that she was untouchable, that her voice was a gift nobody else had. If that wasn't true, then what did that make the last 8 years of his life? By the time the doors opened and the guests started arriving, Tariq had changed into a fresh uniform and stationed himself near the side stage entrance. His job during the event was simple. Stay out of sight, make sure the backstage area stayed clean, be ready to handle anything the crew needed. He was good at being a shadow. The auditorium filled with people in gowns and tailored suits. Champagne flowed. Cameras captured every angle for the live stream that was being broadcast to millions of viewers. Tariq watched from the wings as Ardan took the stage. She looked radiant, confident. She thanked everyone for coming and talked about the importance of giving back. The audience applauded. Nobody questioned her. Nobody doubted her. Then she started singing. The first song was flawless, but Tariq noticed the same thing he'd heard during rehearsal. Her voice was being doubled by a backing track. Not loudly, just enough to fill in the edges. Enough to hit the notes she couldn't quite reach on her own. It was subtle, professional. Nobody in the audience would ever know. But Tariq knew. And for the first time in years, something cracked open inside him. Not anger, not bitterness. Just a cold, clear realization. She had taken everything from him with a lie. And she was still lying. Ardan finished her song to thunderous applause. She smiled and waved, and the cameras loved her. Then she did something that made Tariq's stomach drop. She scanned the room, her eyes moving past the guests in the front rows, past the production crew, and landed on him standing in the shadows near the stage exit. She smiled. Not the warm, camera-ready smile she gave the audience. Something sharper, something that told him she knew exactly who he was. She walked to the edge of the stage and raised her microphone. Her voice carried across the entire auditorium. "Ladies and gentlemen," she said, her tone light and playful, "I want to do something special tonight, something spontaneous." The audience quieted. Tariq felt his chest tighten. "I see someone back there who I think deserves a moment in the spotlight." Ardan continued. She pointed directly at him. "You, come up here." Every head in the room turned. The cameras followed. Tariq didn't move. "Don't be shy," Ardan said, her smile widening. "Come on, let's give him a round of applause." The audience clapped, uncertain but willing to follow her lead. Tariq's hands were shaking. He could walk away. He could refuse. But he knew what that would look like. A janitor too scared to accept a generous offer from a beloved star. She had already won, so he stepped forward. He walked through the crowd, past tables full of people who didn't see him as anything more than part of the help. He climbed the steps to the stage, and Ardan handed him the microphone. The lights were blinding. The cameras were everywhere. Millions of people were watching. Ardan leaned in close, her voice too low for the microphone to catch. Let's see if you still remember how to sing, she whispered. Then louder for the audience, she said, "Sing us something. Anything you like." She stepped back and waited. The band didn't play. The backing track didn't start. It was just him, alone on that stage, exactly where she wanted him. The silence in the auditorium was complete. Tariq stood under lights so bright they turned everything beyond the stage into darkness. He couldn't see the faces in the crowd, but he could feel them watching, waiting. The microphone in his hand felt heavier than it should have. Arden stood a few feet away, her expression perfectly composed, like she was doing him a favor. Like this was charity. The live stream chat was already moving too fast to read, but the production monitors showed thousands of comments flooding in every second. People wanted to know who he was, why she'd picked him. Someone had already screenshotted his uniform and circulated it with speculation. A janitor, a random worker, someone she was about to make famous for 15 seconds before the world forgot him again. Tariq looked at Ardan. She tilted her head slightly, her smile never faltering. She was waiting for him to fumble, to panic, to prove that she had been right about him all those years ago, that he didn't have what it took, that he never did. But something in Tariq had shifted the moment she called him onto that stage. The fear was still there, but underneath it was something colder, sharper. He turned to the sound engineer sitting at the board near the side of the stage. His voice was calm when he spoke into the microphone. "Can you turn off the backing track?" The question landed like a stone in still water. The engineer looked confused. Ardan's smile flickered just for a second. The audience stirred. Somewhere in the room, someone coughed. Ardan recovered quickly. She laughed, light and dismissive. "There's no backing track," she said. "I sing live, always have." Tariq didn't look at her. He kept his eyes on the engineer. "Then it won't be a problem to turn it off," he said. The engineer glanced at Ardan. She didn't say anything, but her expression hardened. The engineer hesitated, then reached for the board. A moment later, a faint hum that had been running underneath everything went silent. The difference was subtle, but anyone who knew sound could hear it. The room felt thinner, more exposed. Arden's jaw tightened. She stepped forward, her voice still controlled but edged with something new. "I don't know what you're trying to prove," she said. "But if you want to embarrass yourself, go ahead." Tariq finally looked at her. For the first time in 8 years, he wasn't looking at the woman who had destroyed his career. He was looking at someone who was afraid. She hid it well, but he could see it in the way her hand gripped the edge of her dress, the way her breath came just a little faster. "I'm not trying to prove anything," Tariq said. "I just want to hear you sing. Really sing. No help, no track, just your voice." The crowd shifted. A few murmurs rippled through the room. This wasn't what they'd come for. This wasn't the script. Ardan's publicist was already moving towards the stage, but Ardan held up a hand to stop her. She wasn't going to let this look like she was backing down. Not in front of cameras, not in front of millions of people. "Fine," she said. Her voice was ice. "But after I sing, you're going to sing too. Deal?" Tariq nodded. He stepped back and handed her the microphone. The band looked uncertain, waiting for a cue. Ardan gestured at them sharply, and the piano started. It was the opening to her most famous song, the one that had defined her career, the one everyone knew her for. The climax had a high note that was supposed to be impossible, the note that made people call her a prodigy. She started singing. Her voice was strong at first, controlled and practiced. She moved through the verses with confidence, hitting every mark she was supposed to hit. But as the song built toward the climax, something changed. Her breathing got shallow. Her tone thinned. She was setting up for the high note, the one that should have been effortless, and Tariq could see her preparing for it like someone bracing for impact. When she reached for it, the note cracked. Not badly. Not enough that most people would notice, but it cracked. She pulled back immediately, dropped down to a safer register, and finished the phrase in a way that almost covered the mistake. Almost. The band kept playing. The audience clapped when she finished, but the applause was different now. Uncertain. Polite. Ardan handed the microphone back to Tariq. Her hand was shaking. She covered it by turning to smile at the audience, but Tariq saw it. He saw everything. "Your turn," she said quietly. Then louder, for everyone to hear, she added, "Let's see what you've got." The band didn't start playing. No one gave Tariq a cue. There was no music, no backing track, no safety net. Just him and a room full of people who expected him to fail. He thought about Grace, about the medication she needed, about the surgery that was coming, about every choice he'd made in the last 8 years that had led him to this exact moment. He brought the microphone to his lips and started to sing. The song he chose was old, a standard, something most people knew. He started low, his voice rough at first, like he was testing whether it still worked. The first few notes were cautious, careful. But then something opened up. His voice found the shape of the melody and settled into it like muscle memory. The room went quiet in a different way. People weren't just watching anymore. They were listening. Tariq moved through the verses, his voice steady and clear, and when he reached the bridge, he started to climb. Higher, higher, into a register most men couldn't touch. His falsetto was seamless. No strain, no crack, just pure, controlled sound that filled every corner of the auditorium without effort. He hit notes Ardan had never reached, notes she'd built her career pretending she could sing. And he held them, sustained them, let them ring out until the entire room seemed to vibrate with the sound. When he finished, the silence that followed was complete. No one moved, no one breathed. Then someone in the back stood up. Then another. Then the entire room was on its feet, applause crashing over him like a wave. The live stream chat exploded. The cameras stayed locked on him. And Ardan stood frozen at the edge of the stage, her face pale, her hands clenched at her sides. Tariq handed the microphone back to her. He didn't say anything. He didn't need to. But before he could step off the stage, a voice cut through the noise. A man in the front row stood up. He was older, maybe 60, with grey hair and a lanyard that marked him as industry press. "I know you," the man said, his voice carrying. "You're Tariq Ellison. You were on Apex stage 8 years ago." The room went still again. Tariq froze. Ardan's eyes widened. The man kept talking. "You were disqualified before the finals, but I was there. I was covering the show. You had the best voice in the competition. Everyone knew it." Another voice spoke up. A woman this time, standing near the middle of the room. She was younger, maybe in her 30s, and she looked like she worked in production. "I worked on Ardan's first album," she said. Her voice was shaking, but she didn't stop. "We used a session singer for the high notes. Ardan couldn't hit them in the studio. We layered her voice with someone else's and told everyone it was all her." The auditorium erupted. Voices overlapped. Cameras swung toward the woman. Ardan's publicist was shouting something, but no one was listening. The live stream chat was moving so fast the words were just a blur. Someone in the production booth was yelling to cut the feed, but it was too late. Millions of people had already heard it. Ardan grabbed the microphone from Tariq. Her voice was sharp and loud when she spoke. "That's a lie," she said. "That's a complete lie. I've never used anyone else's voice. Never." But her voice cracked when she said it, the same way it had cracked when she tried to sing, and everyone heard it. The man who had recognized Tariq spoke again. "There are recordings," he said. "Session logs, credits that were buried. If people start looking, they'll find them." Arden's face went white. She looked at Tariq, and for a moment he saw something he hadn't expected. Not anger, not hatred, just fear, raw and undeniable. She had built everything on a foundation that was collapsing in real time, and there was nothing she could do to stop it. Tariq turned and walked off the stage. He didn't run. He didn't look back. He just walked. Through the crowd. Past the cameras. Past the security guards who didn't know whether to stop him or let him go. He walked out of the auditorium and into the parking lot, where the air was cool and the noise from inside was muffled by distance. His phone was buzzing in his pocket. Text messages, calls, notifications. He ignored all of it. He sat down on the curb near his car and stared at the sky. His hands were still shaking. Not from fear, from the weight of what had just happened. He had spent 8 years believing he wasn't enough, that he had failed, that Ardan had been right about him. But she had never been right. She had just been louder. Inside, the gala was falling apart. The live stream had cut to black, but the damage was done. Social media was already tearing through Ardan's catalogue, isolating vocal tracks, comparing studio recordings to live performances. People were finding inconsistencies, gaps, proof. The woman who had spoken up was being swarmed by reporters. The man who recognized Tariq was giving interviews. Ardan's team was in full crisis mode, but there was no controlling it. The truth had a momentum of its own now. Tariq didn't know any of that yet. He just sat in the parking lot and thought about Grace, about going home and telling her that her dad used to sing, that he still could, that maybe, just maybe, things were about to change. Tariq drove home in silence. His phone kept lighting up on the passenger seat, but he didn't touch it. The city streets were empty at this hour, just street lights and the occasional car passing in the opposite direction. His hands were steady on the wheel now. The shaking had stopped somewhere between the parking lot and the highway. He felt hollowed out. Not in a bad way, just empty. Like something heavy had been lifted and he didn't know yet what to do with the space it left behind. Grace was asleep when he got home. The babysitter, a college student named Maya who lived 2 doors down, was on the couch watching something on her phone. She looked up when Tariq walked in and her eyes went wide. "You're trending," Maya said. She held up her phone. The screen showed a video clip of him singing. The view count was already in the millions. "What happened?" Tariq glanced at the screen but didn't take the phone. "Long story?" he said. He pulled out his wallet and handed her $40. "Thanks for staying late." Maya hesitated, like she wanted to ask more questions, but something in Tariq's face stopped her. She took the money and left. Tariq locked the door behind her and stood in the quiet of his apartment. It was small, 2 bedrooms, cheap furniture, the kind of place that always felt temporary even after 3 years. But it was clean. It was safe. It was theirs. He walked into Grace's room and stood in the doorway. She was curled up under a blanket covered in stars, her breathing slow and even. A medical alert bracelet sat on her nightstand next to a half-finished glass of water. Tariq watched her for a long time. He thought about all the nights he'd come home too tired to do anything but collapse. All the times he'd told himself that keeping her alive was enough, that dreams didn't matter if you couldn't pay the rent. But standing there now, he wasn't sure that was true anymore. He went back to the living room and finally picked up his phone. The notifications were overwhelming. Messages from people he hadn't spoken to in years. Friend requests from strangers. News outlets asking for interviews. His email inbox had hundreds of unread messages. He scrolled through them slowly, not reading most of it, until he found one that made him stop. It was from a lawyer named David Brennan. The subject line said, "Representation offer." Tariq almost deleted it, but something made him open it instead. The message was short, professional. It said Brennan had seen the live stream and believed Tariq had grounds for a defamation suit against Ardan Solis. It said he worked on contingency and wouldn't charge anything unless they won. It ended with a phone number and a request to call as soon as possible. Tariq put the phone down. He didn't know if he wanted to sue anyone. He didn't know if he wanted any of this. All he'd wanted was to survive, to take care of Grace, to make it through one more day without everything falling apart. But the world had other plans now. By morning, the story had exploded. Every major news outlet was covering it. Entertainment blogs, social media, even mainstream networks were running segments. The video of Tariq singing had been watched over 20 million times. Audio engineers were breaking down Ardan's studio recordings and finding exactly what the woman at the gala had said they would find. Layered vocals, pitch correction that went beyond standard production, session singers whose names had been scrubbed from the credits. Ardan's team released a statement. It said the allegations were baseless, that she had always performed her own vocals, that any suggestion otherwise was a coordinated attack meant to damage her reputation. But the statement felt thin, defensive, and it didn't address the evidence that kept surfacing. By noon, 3 major sponsors had pulled their endorsements. Ardan's upcoming tour dates started getting cancelled. Radio stations stopped playing her music. The foundation she'd built over a decade was crumbling in real time, and there was nothing she could do to stop it. Tariq watched it happen from his couch, while Grace ate cereal and asked him why people kept calling. He told her it was nothing. Just work stuff. She didn't push. She was used to her dad keeping things simple, keeping things quiet. But that afternoon, someone knocked on the door. Tariq looked through the peephole and saw a man in a suit, mid-50s, graying hair. He looked tired but determined. Tariq opened the door but left the chain on. "Tariq Ellison?" The man said. "Who's asking?" "My name is Marcus Webb. I was a producer on Apex Stage, the season you competed." Tariq's chest tightened. He didn't say anything. Marcus continued. "I need to tell you something. Something I should have said 8 years ago." Tariq hesitated, then unlocked the chain and let him in. They sat at the small kitchen table. Grace was in her room now, door closed, headphones on. Marcus folded his hands on the table and looked at Tariq directly. "We knew why you missed the semifinals," Marcus said. "The whole production team knew. Your wife had just died. You had a newborn in the ICU. We knew." Tariq's jaw tightened. "Then why didn't you say anything?" Marcus looked down. "Because Ardan told us not to. She was a guest judge, but she had pull. She said if we made excuses for you, it would set a bad precedent. That the show was about talent and commitment, not sob stories. She convinced the network that disqualifying you was the right move. And then she went on air and made sure everyone thought you were the bad guy." Tariq felt something cold settle in his stomach. "Why are you telling me this now?" "Because I'm tired of carrying it," Marcus said. His voice cracked slightly. "I watched what happened last night. I saw what she tried to do to you. And I can't stay quiet anymore. I have emails, documentation, proof that she pushed for your disqualification and then lied about it publicly. If you want it, it's yours." Tariq stared at him. For 8 years, he had believed the world had just moved on, that he'd been forgotten, that what happened to him was just bad luck and bad timing. But it hadn't been luck. It had been deliberate, calculated. Ardan had destroyed him on purpose and then built her empire on the rubble. "Why would she do that?" Tariq asked quietly. Marcus met his eyes. "Because you were better than her. Even back then. And she knew it." Marcus left 20 minutes later, after giving Tariq a flash drive with everything he'd promised. Tariq sat alone at the table, holding the small piece of plastic in his hand. He could use it. He could burn her career to the ground. He could take everything she'd taken from him and more. But when Grace came out of her room an hour later and asked if they could go to the park, Tariq put the flash drive in a drawer and said yes. They spent the afternoon at the playground. Grace went on the swings while Tariq sat on a bench and watched. His phone kept buzzing, but he ignored it. For a few hours, he let himself just be a father. Not a victim, not a symbol, just a man watching his daughter laugh. That evening, after Grace went to bed, Tariq finally called David Brennan. The lawyer answered on the second ring. "I saw the news," Brennan said. "You're in a strong position. We could move forward immediately." "I don't want to sue her," Tariq said. There was a brief silence on the other end. "May I ask why?" Tariq looked at the drawer where he'd put the flash drive. "Because I don't need to prove she's a liar. The world already knows. What I need is something else." "What's that?" "A chance to sing again. Not because I'm trying to destroy someone, just because I want to." Brennan was quiet for a moment. "I think I can help with that too," he said. 3 weeks later, Tariq received an offer to perform at a benefit concert for a children's hospital. Not as a gimmick, not as a viral moment, just as a singer. The pay wasn't much, but it came with something better. Exposure, legitimacy. A door that had been closed for 8 years cracking open again. He accepted. Ardan Solis disappeared from public view after the gala. Her team stopped issuing statements. Her social media went dark. Rumors said she'd left the country. Others said she was in litigation with her label. Tariq didn't follow the stories. He didn't need to. She was no longer part of his life. The night of the benefit concert, Tariq stood backstage and felt the same nerves he'd felt 8 years ago. But this time, Grace was in the audience. Front row, smiling. The surgery fund had been fully covered by donations that poured in after the video went viral. She was scheduled for the procedure in 2 months, and the doctors said her prognosis was good. When Tariq walked onto the stage, the applause was warm. Real. He took the microphone and looked out at the crowd. He didn't see judgment, he didn't see pity, he just saw people who wanted to hear him sing. So he did. He sang the same song he'd sung at the gala. But this time, there was no anger behind it. No bitterness, just sound. Pure and clear and free. When he hit the high notes, the room went still. And when he finished, the applause felt like something he'd earned. Afterward, a journalist asked him if he had any message for Ardan Solis. Tariq thought about it. "No," he said. "I don't think about her anymore." And he meant it. He went home that night and sat on the couch with Grace. She fell asleep against his shoulder while they watched a movie neither of them was really paying attention to. Tariq looked at her and realized something he hadn't let himself believe in a long time. They were going to be okay. Not because he'd won some public battle, not because he'd destroyed the person who hurt him, but because he'd remembered who he was before the world tried to tell him he was nothing. He was Tariq Ellison. He was a father. He was a singer. And that was enough.